I'm not even sure that it's cool to clown on isekai anymore. Isekai used to be an easy punchline only a few years ago. If people wanted to make a joke about trashy anime, they'd just reference isekai. But now it seems that this has fallen out of fashion for most people, because while everyone was complaining about a decade ago that isekai was going to ruin anime forever, all that the genre seems to have done is give us all elf fetishes. Although another reason that the cheers have fallen off might have something to do with the fact that there's actually quite a few good isekai that have come out recently. Be it Konosuba being one of the most popular comedy anime, who doesn't have a main character who shares a name with a myth that got turned into a Ghibli film, Re:Zero suddenly getting a whole lot better after the main character starts drinking piss, or Mushoku Tensei's first season being absolutely phenomenal. No shade on the second season though, because I'm watching the second part of season 2 now, and it's really starting to get into its stride. Plus it's also very entertaining watching Rudeus in the process of trying to invent a whole new kind of pregnant to get Sylphie. But I'm glad isekai is becoming respected again, because it means that I can now be proud to be British once more. You heard me. Because the country I'm from is directly responsible for the isekai genre. Whether you call it Great Britain, the United Kingdom, or that shithole with the bastards who took all of our stuff, you owe this questionable little island for isekai. You're welcome, planet Earth. I want to show you that this country not only laid the foundations for how isekai became so popular amongst anime fans today, but also helped inspire some of isekai's most famous tropes. And not just that one. For those who don't know, isekai means another world in Japanese. The genre initially stems from light novels, the first popular one being Mushoku Tensei, in which someone is transported or reincarnated into a different world, typically one that is inspired by fantasy RPGs. Doesn't always necessarily have to be this way. After all, Yojo Senki isn't set in an RPG world, instead it's set in a Heart of Iron 4 map. But most isekai follow that general formula. Also, Oshinoko is not an isekai. What is wrong with you people? While a staple within the Japanese anime sphere, the genre's earliest influence is a light novel that was actually written in Great Britain in the late 19th century. The original name of this light novel was I Got Transported to Another World with an OP growing ability, but I still have no idea what anyone is saying, though Victorian publishing houses deemed that the name was too long for print, thus shortened the title to Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll's novel is one that I'm not actually stretching when I say it inspired a lot of isekai, as much as it inspired basically everything else. Honestly, it'd be shorter to list all of the isekai that weren't partially inspired by Alice in Wonderland. This book is so influential, it inspires other anime creators outside of isekai. Lewis Carroll is even listed as one of the main influences over the author of Rurouni Kenshin. Not necessarily for his impact on his work, more his hard drive. I want to continue barking up this Alice in Wonderland tree, because I actually went to an exhibition 5 years ago about manga, and it was a proper big exhibition. It was done at this little known spot called the British Museum. The introduction they had to the exhibition was framing the idea of entering the realm of Japanese manga as stepping into Wonderland, just as Alice did. They even had a little character directly modelled after Alice as the sort of mascot of this exhibition. That's something they clearly put a lot of thought into. It's just a shame that the rest of this exhibition wasn't very good. Okay, rant time. So, they only reference like 3 different manga series, and with the exception of Golden Kamuy, most of them were like really obvious choices, so Ghibli anime and Pokemon. This could have been like a massive awakening for a load of people in the UK. Some chances to show off anime and manga they wouldn't have known before, but nah, just show them what they already know. I was a little annoyed by this, so when there was a feedback terminal by the exit, which asked a few questions, I decided I would go in on it. One of them was, did you learn anything you hadn't before? And since I'd spent the whole day getting there, and they weren't even bothered to talk about Steins Gate in the section where they talk about anime video game adaptations, I might as well. I started writing this out on the terminal, but for some reason the letter A didn't work, so I had to try and type everything out without use of one of the most important letters in the English language. So halfway through, I gave up. I know many people say that the British Museum stole a lot of its artifacts, which is fair, but you don't think they could have at least stolen a bit more for this exhibition? What is this video about again? Isekai has been pumped out for over a decade now, with Sword Art Online being the first anime some claim to have popularized the trend of isekai adaptations in the anime sphere. This anime came out in 2012, and the genre has only been getting stronger and stronger as time has gone on. The main thing you have to thank for this is the British education system. Don't believe me? Well, explain this lesser-known manga series known as the Magic Key. Within this, rivals Biff and Chip, as well as the deity who summons them, known as Spot the dog, embark on numerous adventures where they enter another world using the Magic Key, which is the one overpowered item they were allowed to take with them. Every child had to read this in British primary schools in Key Stage 1, so by Key Stage 2, we went from reading isekai to creating it. In Year 5, both classes in my year had to create a story story where the characters use a portal. This wasn't because it helped us test out a new grammatical structure or help us hone our adjectives. Our only requirement is that we included the characters entering another world. And everyone had to do this, bear in mind, for a class that roughly reached adolescence in 2012, the year Sword Art Online came out. I'd tell you what I actually wrote for this assignment, but I barely wrote any of the story as I wrote very slowly. Some habits clearly die hard because this script has somehow taken me 2 weeks, and then another extra week to record it. Not only has British society been preparing people for isekai, but isekai has also been preparing people for British society, as that comes across in how they represent families. When you hear the word isekai and family, you might initially be drawn to some easy incest jokes, but in reality not that many isekai feature incest. No Game No Life at a stretch, and it was only the non-isekai bits of Sword Art Online that featured incest. Plus, despite what British people tell you, incest isn't that widespread in the UK. In fact, the only regions one could describe as inbred are the following. To me, the show that gets the dynamic of British families correct is Mushoku Tensei. The series is implied to be set in a medieval setting, though some of the designs may potentially land it closer to being Tudor, but my point will still stand with what I'm about to tell you. Rudeus is born as the son of Paul Greyrat, who is part of the noble Greyrat family who are notably entrenched within the upper class system of the world. One of Paul's biggest shortcomings is his propensity for affairs, and this in reference to the fact that during the medieval and Tudor periods, most of the English nobility was French. But how did Rudeus get reincarnated? Well, it's the same way that most isekai protagonists ends the extended goon sesh that they call their past lives by getting run over. The undisputed goat of this is none other than the murder-mobile, the hikikomori hearse, the neat neutralizer, the vehicle that creates more skid marks than a Vindaloo, Truck-kun. Britain is responsible for that. Germany might have invented the truck, but it was Britain who galvanised the spirit of Truck-kun almost a century before the actual thing was invented. In the year 1830, a man called William Huskinson was present at the opening of the Liverpool-Manchester Railway. He was standing on the tracks with several others before the train came into the station, but upon hearing the train was coming, everyone rightfully cleared off the tracks, apart from William Huskinson. You see, while everyone was getting out of the way, William Huskinson was trying to shake the hand of a certain Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. Not only was this the Prime Minister at the time, but also the man who had only a decade earlier defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. Huskinson held a small grudge against Wellington, as this man had effectively BTFO'd his mentor, George Canning. So Huskinson walked down the platform towards Wellington in order to shake his hand and mend their relationship, right as the train was coming into the platform. As you can imagine, the train, known as the Rocket, came into the station and ran Huskinson over. But here's the plot twist though, because a lot of you might be assuming that from Wellington's perspective, this plays out like that bit from The Boys where Huey's girlfriend gets killed, except instead of a train, it's a train. So the Rocket was the fastest vehicle on the planet at the time, hitting a whopping 40 miles an hour, roughly an hour after it actually got into the station, as once most of the people had gotten off it, the speed it was going at upon getting into the station was likely under 10 miles an hour, potentially as little as 5 miles an hour. Also, Huskinson saw this train coming and had time to run across the track multiple times, as well as try and open the doors of the train next to him. I don't want to be that guy, but I could have outran that train. In fact, you could have probably outran that train. Huskinson certainly didn't though, as his legs were crushed and he died about 2 hours later. This man got one step above the Kazuma treatment. As some of you might remember, this isn't even the first time I've talked about this moment of history. If you can remember the last time I did, then you're a real one. Also, I had a huge tolerance for shit content 5 years ago. Some of you still aren't convinced though, and are potentially even claiming that I just made this video to show off random bits of history trivia and loosely tie them to anime. Where would you get such an idea? Well, here's the slam dunk to prove me right in Britain's responsibility for the creation of isekai. The final thing that Britain contributed to isekai is the influence it had over the fantasy genre as a whole. Many fantasy settings owe themselves to J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, as many of the fantasy tropes that define the worlds that the majority of isekai protagonists inhabit come from Lord of the Rings. Obviously, just because J.R.R. Tolkien happened to be from the United Kingdom doesn't necessarily prove that the fantasy genre is quintessentially British. After all, it's a high-concept fictional world intentionally detached from ours. I say intentionally detached because Tolkien himself championed the removal of allegorical elements in his works. Tolkien served in both world wars, but constantly denied that any of his experiences in them impacted the creation of Middle-earth. Tolkien was a devout Catholic, but still wanted his story to be one that, while still reverent to God and the virtues of faith, didn't necessarily bear any resemblance to events in the Bible. However, There's one thing that Tolkien himself said impacted his writing, and this is the only thing he has explicitly mentioned that has served as inspiration. And it's from his child. Him and his brother used to play in the hills near where he lived, and his main inspiration for the forces of Mordor, destroying all that was good in Middle-earth, was watching those beautiful hills where he played as a child get turned into the outer suburbs of Birmingham. If I may make an interjection, how shit does your city have to literally be considered the real-life Mordor? Like, seriously, people were asking Tolkien whether it was leftover trauma from the trenches that inspired the wars in Middle-earth. But nah, it wasn't the Somme, it was Smethwick. So there you go. Isekai protagonists have to be overpowered, because they have to fight Danny G.